There is one more leader who's not coming. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. He wanted to attend the G20 summit, but he did not get an invite. Ukraine is not a G20 member, although the war in Ukraine will feature prominently in the conversations this weekend. And just ahead of the summit, there's been a shakeup in Kiev. The defense minister has been sacked. His name is Oleksiy Reznikov. Reznikov was made defense minister in November 2021, and during the war, he emerged as an important figure. He built up support for Ukraine in the West. One of his key tasks was to lobby for powerful weapons, and he did it. But in recent weeks, some reports emerged. They said his days in the defense ministry were numbered. And yesterday, President Zelensky put an end to the speculation. He confirmed Reznikov's exit.
This week, the parliament will be asked to make a staff-related decision. I would like to outline it now. I have decided to replace the defense minister of Ukraine. Oleksiy Reznikov has been through more than 550 days of full-scale war. I believe that the ministry needs new approaches and other formats of interaction with both the military and society as a whole.
A new approach, that's what the president wants. And it is a fact that the current approach is not working. A few weeks back, Ukraine launched a counter-offensive. There was a lot of hype around it. They wanted to retake occupied territory. They wanted to push the Russians back. None of it is happening. It proved to be a costly and futile exercise. And now there's going to be a change of guard. Does that mean Ukraine will wrap up the counter-offensive? It's hard to say, but one thing is quite clear. Reznikov's exit is not just about military strategy. It is also about other things. There is more to this story. Two broad reasons behind his exit: corruption and narrative building. Now, corruption is an old issue in Ukraine, especially in the defense establishment. It is mired in graft cases. There have been serious allegations. One of the cases is about military rations. They were bought at inflated prices. And what was the value of this contract? More than $1 billion. The case came to light earlier this year, and soon it snowballed into a major controversy. Reznikov was the defense minister then, but he did not sign the contract, and yet he was the one who came under fire for it. The civil society criticized him. They said the buck stops with the defense minister. He, on his part, called it a smear campaign. He pushed back against the criticism, but he wasn't really able to sway public opinion. Because this is not a one-off. Ukraine's army is plagued by corruption. Multiple scandals have come to light. Corruption in medical exemptions was investigated. Conscription officials were caught taking bribes. And some cases are truly incredible, like this one. Ukraine's enlistment offices were audited. One recruitment chief was caught. Doing what? Using soldiers as his personal servants. They were sent to his private estate and used in construction activity. Soldiers. All of this happened on Reznikov's watch. So while he wasn't personally implicated in any case, on the anti-corruption front, he seemed ineffective. And perhaps Zelensky thought a change was necessary. Also, Western allies have poured billions of dollars into this war. The last thing they would want is for that money to be lost in corruption. And they would ask questions if they're not asking them already. Hence the sacking. Reason number two, it could be the need to build a new narrative. Meet Rustem Umerov, the man who will be Ukraine's new defense minister. He used to be an investment banker and a member of Ukraine's opposition. But since the beginning of this war, Umerov has donned the hat of a negotiator. He's been involved in prisoner exchanges. Also, the Black Sea grain deal, the one brokered by the United Nations, a deal to secure grain exports from Ukraine to the world. Umerov was Ukraine's chief negotiator for that deal. Recently, that deal fell apart. Russia walked out, and talks are on to revive it. So why did Zelensky choose this man for the defense minister's post? Is he preparing to negotiate with Russia? Well, it's a possibility. Kiev could also be trying to send a message to Moscow. Umerov belongs to the Crimean Tatar community. It's an ethnic group in Crimea, a region that Russia took in 2014. They annexed it in 2014. And since then, these Crimeans are said to have been persecuted. Umerov has been speaking about this. In fact, I have a quote from him from 2021. He said, "The deportation of Crimean Tatars is one of the greatest crimes of the Soviet regime. It was started by the tyrants in power at that time in order to exterminate an entire nation." So this appointment could be a political message. And what happens to Reznikov? He could get a different job. Some reports say he could be Ukraine's next ambassador to the UK. We'll have to wait and see. Either way, Zelensky is shifting gears. What about Russia? Their President Vladimir Putin is not coming to the G20 either, although he did get an invite. Instead, Putin is going to China next month. And ahead of that visit, China is extending more support to Moscow. Russian banks are raising money from China. Leading Chinese banks have stepped in. They're giving loans worth billions to Moscow. Which banks are these? Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, Bank of China, China Construction Bank, and Agricultural Bank of China. These are among China's top banks. How much is their exposure to Russian banks? Almost $10 billion now. Russia depends more on Chinese banks now. It says it does not want to trade in what it calls toxic currencies. That's the term they use, toxic currencies, like the dollar and the euro. Trade between Russia and China has also grown. Chinese exports to Russia have risen. And what are the Russians buying? Things like microchips, trench digging excavators, goods that can potentially be used by the Russian military. These are called dual-use goods. They have both civilian and military applications. This is what China is giving to Russia. And Moscow can use all the support it gets as the war takes a new turn. Yet another drone attack was reported today on a building in Kurchatov. This is near the Ukraine border. Reports say Russia's intelligence services were using this building. The attack did not cause a lot of physical damage, but perhaps that was not even the idea. Ukraine has taken the war inside Russia. It has changed its defense minister, and it's working on building a new narrative. Expect more action in the weeks ahead. Our next story is about Italy. Their foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, is currently in China, and on top of his agenda is the BRI, China's Belt and Road Initiative. It was once hailed as Chinese President Xi Jinping's project of the century, but in recent times, it has become the road to nowhere, Belt and Road Blocks. That's what it's called. And now Italy wants out. In 2019, it became the first member of the European Union and the only G7 nation to join China's BRI. 4 years have passed since. The pact expires in December this year, and Italy does not plan to renew it. What does it mean for their relationship with China and for Xi Jinping's dream project? Our next report tells you.
In 2019, Italy angered the US and Europe. It did the unexpected. Italy became the first European Union member and the only G7 state to join the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a Chinese scheme. It envisions rebuilding the old Silk Road by connecting China with mainly Asia and Europe. Under this scheme, China has financed and built vast amounts of infrastructure, like power plants, railways, highways, and ports. Countries that joined the scheme saw it as a tool to increase investment, to boost their exports. This was especially true for Italy. It was facing economic turmoil when it decided to join the BRI. But over time, the outlook has changed. Many now call the BRI a debt trap, a state-backed campaign for global dominance. This again is true for Italy. 4 years have passed since Italy signed the agreement. Recently, the Italian defense minister, Guido Crosetto, called it an improvised and atrocious act. Earlier in May, Italian PM Giorgia Meloni called it a big mistake. This weekend, Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani also agreed, only in a more diplomatic way. He said the plan didn't bring expected results, and now he's in China. As the most senior Italian official to visit the country since the pandemic, it's obvious that the BRI is likely top of the agenda. After all, Italy's anti-BRI sentiment could be actionable any time now. The agreement will expire in December this year. Italy does not plan to renew it. And this isn't too shocking. Since Italy joined the BRI, its exports to China increased from $15.6 billion to $19.9 billion. But Chinese exports to Italy grew much more dramatically. No prizes for guessing who really benefited. Now, let's look at investments. China has invested $24 billion in Italy since 2005, but only $1.83 billion of that since Italy joined the BRI. Clearly, joining the BRI did not do Italy much good. If Italy does pull out of the BRI, it will be a big blow to Xi's crown jewel, especially as the scheme is already struggling. Under the BRI, China's lending began slipping before 2020. When the pandemic hit, this was only accelerated. Yet a lot of projects continued, and Beijing had little control over things on the ground. In recent years, there have been an increasing number of reports. They talk about BRI construction failures, project cancellations by BRI partner countries, or by Chinese companies due to financial problems. Sometimes BRI projects lead to nowhere, quite literally. Like a BRI-funded railway, it ends in the middle of a field in Kenya. On top of this, for many countries, taking loans has become unsustainable. One of the biggest examples is Sri Lanka. It defaulted on a mountain of debt last year. Or look at Pakistan. It owes nearly 1/3 of its foreign debt to China. Now, Zambia is debt-laden and trying to work out a restructuring plan with China, which is its biggest bilateral creditor. There is growing outrage over the BRI. While for some countries the reasons are economic, for others they are political. European countries view China as a rival. To them, China isn't a partner, even if it pretends to be one, and an Italian withdrawal reflects this outlook. So, whatever be the reason, China's BRI is being pushed away. But Beijing is sticking to its preferred state, that of being in denial. After all, it's China's passion project that builds inroads to its visionary goal of overseas control. But if Italy backs out of the agreement, it will be a body blow to Beijing's ambitions, whether it admits it or not.
Sagarika Chakrabarti, Dhara Shah, and Priyadarshini Patil. These women may have never known each other, but they've all made headlines over the same issue. A bitter child custody battle in a foreign nation. They lived outside India, and their child was taken away by the state in the name of safety. The latest case is that of Priyadarshini Patil, 40 years old, lived with her husband in Sydney, had 2 teenage children. A few years back, her son ended up in hospital. Then in 2021, both her children were taken into state custody. The trial to get them back dragged on. This was a custody battle. They had online hearings. Recently, the hearing was deferred to November, and that's when Priyadarshini Patil, the mother, died by suicide. It's a very tragic story, but not a new one. And every time such a case hits the headlines, it becomes a diplomatic incident, and in each case, the same questions are raised. Is this a case of child safety, or is it overreach by authorities? Where do you draw the line between cultural differences and safety, and can the state take away your right to be a parent? Our next report explores all of this and more.
A mother's love for her children. Books talk about it, movies laud it, and the world celebrates it. But is a mother's love different in different countries? What happens when it's challenged, when the state blames you of neglect? What happens when your child is taken away from you? These are some of the questions that have plagued the case of Priyadarshini Patil and the case of many others. Priyadarshini Patil was a 40-year-old IT employee. She was based in Sydney. She lived with her husband and 2 teenage children. All was well until her son got admitted to the hospital. Reports say he was suffering from ulcerative colitis. 6 months of treatment continued, but his parents felt there was no improvement in his condition. So they wanted to move him out of the hospital, and this triggered a child protection case. The doctors filed a complaint against the Patils. They cited child neglect. So child welfare authorities visited their house. They inspected the family and decided to take the 2 children into custody. The custody trial is underway, but Priyadarshini decided to leave the country. She left Australia on August 18th. She said she was returning home to her parents. But she never made it back. Instead, she died by suicide. Priyadarshini's tale is a tragic one. But this is not a first. Indian parents have been involved in custody battles abroad, both with the courts and social welfare departments. There was the case of Sagarika Chakraborty. She was deemed an unfit mother by the government of Norway. She had her children taken away from her and was finally granted custody after years of legal battle. Her story even inspired a Bollywood movie. Then there was the case of Dhara Shah. Her 7-month-old toddler was taken away by authorities in Germany. The case blew up so much that even the Indian government intervened. They called for early repatriation of the baby girl. However, she continues to be in foster care in Germany. But the cases continue to raise an important question. Is this a case of child safety, or is there more behind it? Like Sagarika Chakraborty's case against the government of Norway, it emerged that the Norwegian authorities objected to a couple of things, like parents feeding the children with their hands and sharing a bed with them. These are practices common in Indian households, but in Norway, not so much. The case had racist undertones, but it's just one example. In other cases, there have been allegations of physical abuse, like the Germany baby Ariha case. Ariha was taken away on suspicion of sexual abuse, following what the family says is an accidental injury. Such charges are harder to dismiss unless they're proven to be untrue. So, what is it? Is it cultural differences or parental neglect? Every time a case like this emerges, a lot is written about cultures, the warmth of an Indian family versus the formal nature of a Western family. It's often turned into an us versus them story. Technically, you cannot put all such cases under one blanket. Every country has different rules. But can a state just decide to take away your right to be a parent? Is this persecution by child protection agencies, or overreach by the authorities in general, or simply a case of a clash of cultures? Aside from physical abuse, which is an obvious red line, where does one draw the line otherwise? Between cultural difference and safety, and ensure that families and lives are not being destroyed in the process.
We can't see them, we can't feel them, but they're everywhere. I know it's only Monday and this sounds like the beginning of a horror movie, but let me tell you, it may as well be. I'm talking about microplastics. They're in our land, water and air, also in the clouds. Microplastics are in our bodies too. In our lungs, our hearts, our bowels, even in the blood that pulses through us. And now, microplastics could be in our brains too. A new study is out. It says once in the brain, microplastics can increase the risk of a number of problems like inflammation, neurological disorders, and even diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So what are microplastics and how can you reduce your exposure to them? Our next report tells you.
No corner of the planet is free from microplastics, so it's about time we talk about them. As the name suggests, these are minuscule fragments of plastic. It's a broad category which accommodates any piece of plastic less than 5 millimeters in size. Microplastics are everywhere, existing as invisible specks of eroded plastic. They come from our candy wrappers or long-forgotten toothbrushes and live in our clouds, laundry bins, even our food. Like tea, salt, milk, seafood, honey, sugar, vegetables, beer, and soft drinks. Tap water contains plastic, and bottled water contains even more. These microplastics enter our bodies, then happily float in the human bloodstream. And new research suggests that they could make their way into our brains. The study was held by the University of Vienna. It was conducted on mice. These mice ingested water containing plastic. Within 2 hours, plastic had made its way to the mice's brains. This shows how easily plastic could be sneaking into ours. Doctors say if they do, plastic particles could increase risks of a number of problems like inflammation, neurological disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. These are long-term issues. People can also suffer from short-term health effects like cognitive impairment and damage caused to nervous system by toxins. What's worse is that microplastics aren't just consumed by drinking water. People nasally inhale plastics too and even eat them. Then plastic infiltrates most parts of our body, like our organs, including our brains, lungs, hearts, even placenta and breast milk. The discovery of microplastics in our bodies is relatively new, so we don't fully understand how they affect us. But research is underway, and here's what it says so far. Microplastics are linked to negative health outcomes. No shocker there. They increase the risk of obesity, diabetes, reproductive disorders, and neurological problems. So the question is, how do we protect ourselves from plastic? Because plastic is everywhere. It's impossible to be completely safe, but some precautionary actions are within our control. For starters, we need to rethink how we eat and drink. Foods are usually sealed in plastic. They're associated with cleanliness or purity, when actually this is one of the biggest reasons for exposure to microplastics. Plastics often get on our food due to packaging, and the plastic shedding increases if it's exposed to heat. So hot food inside a polythene means more plastic in our food. So we could reduce the risk of plastic packaging or heating food inside plastic bowls. Secondly, switching to natural fibers helps, like wearing cotton or wool instead of polyester, since it could reduce the amount of plastic we inhale. The fact is, we can't worry about every little bit of plastic we encounter because it's everywhere. It's impossible to eliminate the risk. So the goal isn't to live in fear. It's simply to take precautions and minimize the risk. After all, life in plastic isn't always fantastic.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. It was a crash and burn for the Burning Man festival in the United States. 72,000 people got stranded after a rainstorm turned the festival into mud. The festival site, rather, into mud. Landing once on the moon was not enough for the Chandrayaan-3 lander. The Vikram lander conducted a hop experiment, landing on the moon once again. And move over Jack Sparrow. There's a new pirate in town. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is sporting an eye patch to cover bruises from a fall while jogging. Scholz says he's excited for the memes to come. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1998, Google was founded by Larry Page and Sergey Brin. This was while they were PhD students at Stanford University, initially called Backrub. It began as a research project. The duo wanted to create a tool that would deliver relevant search results to readers. 25 years later, Google is the world's largest search engine. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.